10 years ago, my own brother destroyed my entire life with a single testimony. He stood in court, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "My younger brother, he's the one who stole every dollar." Those few words took everything from me: my career, my reputation, my family, the woman I loved. And 10 years of my life, not a single person believed me. My parents turned their backs on me. My friends disappeared. Even my own attorney advised me to plead guilty because every piece of evidence pointed directly at me. The surveillance footage, the digital signature, the emails, the wire transfer records, every single one had been crafted to perfection, so perfectly that even I began to wonder if I had somehow overlooked something myself. The day I was sentenced, I turned around for one last look at my family. My father never looked at me, not even once. My mother was crying, but she never stood up. She never spoke a single word. And my brother lowered his head, playing the role of a heartbroken brother who had been betrayed by his own flesh and blood. 10 years. That's how long I lived behind bars. 10 years. Branded as a thief, a traitor, a convicted criminal. Until the day an old letter was discovered in the company's archived records. Just one letter. That was all it took to turn the entire case upside down. 3 months later, the court ruled that I was innocent. I walked out of prison, a free man. But no one could ever give me back the 10 years that had been stolen from me. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't look for my family. I never returned to my hometown. I changed my phone number. I moved away. I even changed my last name. All I wanted was the chance to live like an ordinary man. I truly believed the past had finally let me go. Until one morning, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, 2 FBI agents were standing on my front porch. The older one showed me his badge, then asked, "Are you Ethan Carter?" I nodded. He studied me for a few seconds. Then he said something that made the blood in my veins run cold. "We need your help to put your brother in prison." For the first time in 10 years, I heard that name again, Daniel Carter. And in that very moment, I realized something. My nightmare had never really ended. 10 years ago, I was 29 years old, the chief financial officer of Carter Industrial Solutions, a manufacturing company my father had spent more than 30 years building from the ground up. To everyone on the outside, the Carter family looked like the perfect American dream. My father, Richard Carter, a self-made businessman, strict, decisive, and a man who valued honor above everything else. My mother, Helen Carter, a kind and gentle woman, always trying to keep peace within the family. My older brother, Daniel Carter, 4 years older than me, the company's executive vice president. Everyone admired him. Smart, calm under pressure, charismatic. If I was the one behind the numbers, Daniel was the man who stood in front of the clients, the public face of the company. Ever since we were kids, our father always said, "One day, the two of you will inherit everything together." And I believed him. I never saw Daniel as my rival. He was the one who taught me how to drive. He taught me how to play baseball. He even punched a kid in high school for bullying me. In every memory I had, Daniel was the perfect older brother. Until that spring, it all started with a number: $3.8 million. The company had set aside that money to acquire a manufacturing plant in Ohio. The deal had been in the works for nearly 8 months. Every document had been signed. Everything was ready. All that remained was the wire transfer. That morning, I was the first person to arrive at the office, just like every other day. I logged into the company's internal banking system, checked the pending transactions. Then, my heart stopped. $3.8 million had vanished from the escrow account. The money had been transferred to a company I'd never even heard of, Bright Horizon Holdings. I immediately opened the transaction record. The transfer had been approved using my account. My digital signature was there, my authentication code, my complete login history. Everything was flawless. So flawless. It was terrifying. I told myself. The system had to be wrong. I called the IT department immediately. They spent nearly an hour checking every server. In the end, there was only one answer. The system was never compromised. A chill ran down my spine. Just then, Daniel walked into my office. He looked at the screen, then looked at me. "Ethan, what's going on?" I explained everything. Daniel didn't panic. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there in silence. A few seconds later, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll figure this out." At that moment, I was genuinely grateful to him. I had no idea that the first person to comfort me was the very man who had dug the deepest grave for me. Less than 20 minutes later, my father arrived. He had never come to the office that early before. Daniel had called him. I explained everything again. My father didn't say a word. He simply ordered, "Print every transaction record." I did exactly as he asked. He flipped through each page carefully, missing nothing. When he reached the last page, he slowly looked up. For the first time in my life, the look in his eyes wasn't the look of a father. It was the look of a man staring at a complete stranger. "Ethan, explain this to me." I answered immediately. "I didn't transfer that money. Someone used my account." My father set the documents down. "If your account was compromised, why was the authentication code sent only to your phone?" I froze. I pulled out my phone. Every authentication message had been deleted. Before I could even process what was happening, the head of corporate security rushed into the room. He was holding a USB drive. "Mr. Carter, we've just reviewed the security footage from the finance office." He plugged the drive into the conference room monitor. The video began to play. There I was, alone in my office, typing my password, logging into the banking system, executing the wire transfer. Every movement, every click, every step, exactly as it should have happened. I stared at the screen, unable to believe what I was seeing. It was my face, my voice, my body, my mannerisms. But I had never done any of it. The room fell completely silent. Then Daniel spoke. His voice was filled with pain. "Little brother, if you were in trouble, you could have come to the family. I would have helped you. Why did you do this?" I spun toward him. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't do it." Daniel lowered his head. He said nothing else. But somehow, that silence made everyone in the room believe him, more than they believed me. A few minutes later, police sirens echoed through the company parking lot. I still didn't know who had called them. Then 2 detectives walked into the conference room. One of them stepped in front of me, pulled out a warrant, and said, "Mr. Ethan Carter, you are under investigation for corporate embezzlement. We need you to come with us." I turned toward my father, hoping, just hoping, he would say one sentence. Just one. "That's my son. Investigate everything before you judge him." But my father quietly turned his face away. The moment the handcuffs locked around my wrists, I realized something. The first thing I had lost wasn't my freedom. It was my own family's faith in me. The handcuffs didn't just lock around my wrists. They also locked away any chance I had of making people believe the truth. I was escorted out of the company headquarters, in front of hundreds of employees, the same people who used to greet me every morning, the same people who always called me Mr. Carter. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them asked a question. They simply stood there, watching. Some shook their heads. Some pulled out their phones to record. Others whispered among themselves. I knew this day would come sooner or later. I heard he had a gambling problem. Maybe he owed money to the mob. Rumors can be born in a matter of minutes, yet they're powerful enough to destroy a person's reputation forever. I was taken into an interrogation room. The very first question the investigators asked wasn't, "Why did you do it?" It was, "Where's the money?" "I don't know." They asked again, "Who helped you?" "I don't know." "Who did you send the money to?" "I don't know." After nearly 3 hours, one of the investigators slammed the case file onto the table. "Mr. Carter, stop wasting our time. Every piece of evidence points directly to you. Your account, your computer, your digital signature, the surveillance footage. Even the one-time authentication code was entered correctly. If it wasn't you, then who was it?" I looked him straight in the eye, then answered calmly, "If I really stole nearly $4 million, why did I come to work this morning? Why didn't I run? Have you checked my personal bank accounts? Have you searched my house? Did I buy a new car? A mansion? Did I transfer money overseas?" The investigator fell silent. He looked back through the file. It was true. There wasn't a single piece of evidence showing that I had benefited from the missing money. But that still wasn't enough. Because in the eyes of the law, the motive might have been unclear, but the evidence seemed undeniable. That first night in the holding cell, I barely slept. I couldn't stop thinking about the security footage. Every frame, every movement, every mouse click. It was so perfect. It terrified me. Then I remembered something. About 2 weeks earlier, Daniel had walked into my office, smiling. "Want to grab lunch?" I shook my head. "I've still got a mountain of reports to finish." He walked behind my desk, looked at my computer screen, then asked, "You still haven't changed your password?" I laughed. "You already know me. I've been using the same pattern for years." Daniel simply nodded, then walked away. Back then, I didn't think anything of it. Now, the memory sent chills down my spine. Had it really been just a casual question? Or was he confirming something? The next morning, my attorney came to see me. His name was Martin Hayes, one of the city's most respected criminal defense lawyers. He sat down, placed the case file on the table, then let out a long sigh. "I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be a very difficult case." I asked, "Is there a witness against me?" Martin looked at me, then nodded. "Yes." I held my breath. "Who?" He hesitated for a few seconds, then quietly answered, "Your brother." It felt as if someone had punched me square in the chest. "That's impossible." Martin opened the file, then slid a document across the table. It was a copy of Daniel's sworn testimony. Every line cut through me like a knife. Over the past 3 months, Ethan repeatedly asked for access to the company's investment fund. He often complained about financial pressure. I advised him to take some time off and get help. I never imagined he would go this far. I slammed the document onto the table. "Every word of that is a lie." Martin remained calm. "I believe you. But who do you think the jury will believe? A grieving older brother, or the defendant accused of embezzlement?" I buried my face in my hands. For the first time, I understood. Daniel wasn't just framing me. He was creating an entire narrative, a story where he was the devoted older brother, my father, the betrayed businessman, the company, the innocent victim, and I was the only villain. 2 days later, I was released on bail, an enormous amount of bail. The person who paid it wasn't my parents. It was Emily, my fiancée. As I walked out of the detention center, I saw her standing across the street. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red from crying. I ran toward her, wrapped my arms around her. "You believe me, don't you?" Emily didn't hug me back. She simply looked into my eyes, for what felt like forever, then whispered, "I want to believe you. But the whole world says you're guilty." I couldn't find the words. "What about you?" Emily slowly reached into her purse, pulled out our engagement ring. She placed it in the palm of my hand, her voice trembling. "Ethan, I'm not strong enough to fight the whole world. I'm sorry." She turned around and walked away, without looking back. I stood alone, in the middle of the parking lot, clutching the ring so tightly that its sharp edge cut into my palm. Blood dripped onto the concrete. But that pain was nothing compared to the moment I realized that every person who had ever mattered to me was leaving, one after another, and my trial hadn't even begun. 3 months later, the trial officially began. Early that morning, the courthouse was already surrounded by reporters. An embezzlement case involving nearly $4 million, connected to one of the city's most prominent family-owned businesses, was more than enough to dominate the headlines. When the prison transport van pulled up, dozens of cameras turned toward me at once. No one called me by my name. Instead, they shouted, "That's the Carter industrial embezzler. Why did you betray your own family? Where did you hide the money?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. In their eyes, I'd been guilty long before the trial ever started. Inside the courtroom, I saw my parents. They were sitting in the front row. Between them was Daniel. He was wearing a dark navy suit. His face looked exhausted. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed he was the one suffering the most. The trial lasted for 2 long weeks, one by one. The prosecution presented its evidence, the transaction records, the login history, the confirmation emails, the surveillance footage, the audit reports. Every single exhibit pointed directly at me. Martin did everything he could to fight back. He reminded the jury that not a single dollar had ever been found in my possession. No unexplained wealth, no luxury purchases, no hidden assets, no unusual spending. Standing before the jury, he spoke with absolute conviction. If my client truly stole this money, there must be somewhere that money ended up. Yet, after 3 months of investigation, the government hasn't found a single dollar connected to Ethan Carter. The prosecutor simply smiled, then replied, "Not finding the money doesn't prove the defendant is innocent. There are countless ways to hide stolen assets." That argument was enough to plant even more doubt. But the deadliest blow hadn't come yet. On the 10th day of the trial, Daniel took the witness stand. I've never forgotten that moment. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, then looked directly at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Ethan is my younger brother. I love him. If I could, I'd give anything for this never to have happened." The courtroom fell silent. Then Daniel continued. "About 6 months ago, Ethan told me several times that he felt like he'd spent his entire life living in my shadow. I thought he was just frustrated. Until the money disappeared. I shot to my feet. He's lying! The judge immediately struck the gavel. "Mr. Carter, sit down." Martin grabbed my arm, shook his head. I clenched my teeth and watched Daniel continue his performance. He wiped away tears. His voice cracked. As his older brother, I failed him. I didn't realize he needed help. "I'm sorry." Soft sobs echoed through the courtroom. Even a few jurors looked at Daniel, with sympathy. That's when I understood. This trial was no longer a battle between truth and lies. It had become a battle between two stories, and Daniel was telling the better story. That afternoon, another witness took the stand, the company's chief information officer. He testified. Mr. Ethan Carter's account showed no signs of unauthorized access. Every action was performed using a trusted device. The IP address matched, the timestamps matched. We found no evidence of external manipulation. Martin stepped forward. Is it technically possible that someone with internal system access could have staged the entire transaction? The witness thought for a moment, then answered, technically, it's possible, but I found no evidence to support that conclusion. That single word, but, was enough to destroy my last remaining hope. 3 days later, the jury returned. I stood. My hands were ice cold. The judge looked toward the jury foreperson, then asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." The foreperson opened the envelope. His voice remained calm. "On the charge of corporate embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty." The world stopped. I couldn't hear anything anymore, only a deafening ringing inside my ears. Few jurors looked at Daniel with sympathy. That's when I understood. This trial was no longer a battle between truth and lies. It had become a battle between two stories. And Daniel was telling the better story. That afternoon, another witness took the stand, the company's chief information officer. He testified. Mr. Ethan Carter's account showed no signs of unauthorized access. Every action was performed using a trusted device. The IP address matched, the timestamps matched. We found no evidence of external manipulation. Martin stepped forward. Is it technically possible that someone with internal system access could have staged the entire transaction? The witness thought for a moment, then answered, technically, it's possible, but I found no evidence to support that conclusion. That single word, but, was enough to destroy my last remaining hope. 3 days later, the jury returned. I stood. My hands were ice cold. The judge looked toward the jury foreperson, then asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." The foreperson opened the envelope. His voice remained calm. "On the charge of corporate embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty." The world stopped. I couldn't hear anything anymore, only a deafening ringing inside my ears. Martin slowly closed his eyes. He knew. It was over. The judge pronounced the sentence. 10 years in federal prison. Subject to possible reduction based on good behavior. 10 years. Because of one lie. As the U.S. Marshals walked toward me, I didn't resist. I simply turned around and looked at my family. My father still refused to look at me. My mother burst into tears, but she never stood. She never ran toward me. She never told the judge, "My son is innocent." And Daniel looked straight at me, then gave me the slightest nod. No one else noticed it, but I did. It wasn't sympathy. It was victory. In that instant, I understood something. The brother I had admired all my life had died long before that day. The man standing in front of me was a stranger. A man who was willing to destroy his own brother, to get everything he wanted, as the prison transport doors slammed shut. I took one last look at the city I once called home. Then I made myself a promise. If the truth ever comes out, I won't waste my life chasing revenge. I only want the world to know who the real thief was. 10 years later, the heavy iron gates of Cedar Ridge Federal Correctional Institution slowly opened. I walked out, carrying an old canvas duffel bag. Inside were only a few changes of clothes, a worn-out Bible, and a document confirming that I had completed my sentence. That was everything I owned. As a man who had once been the chief financial officer of a multi-million-dollar company. 10 years. I entered prison at 29. When I walked out, I was 39. Those 10 years had stolen my youth. Gray streaks had begun to spread through my hair. My hands were covered in calluses. I was no longer the Ethan Carter people used to know. I was simply a former inmate. A man without a family, without a reputation, without a place to call home. I boarded the first bus, bound for Montana. No one knew me there. No one knew my past. I wanted to start over, from nothing. During my first 3 months, I applied for jobs at more than 30 different places. Most employers rejected me the moment they saw my criminal record. Some were polite, others weren't. "I'm sorry. We don't hire people convicted of financial crimes," no matter how many times I said, "I'm innocent." No one wanted to listen. Finally, a small machine shop hired me. The owner's name was Frank Miller. He looked through my paperwork, then asked, "Do you know how to weld?" "I learned in prison." Frank nodded. "Be here tomorrow morning." He didn't ask another question. He didn't judge me. For the first time in 10 years, someone had given me a second chance. I worked harder than I ever had before. During the day, I stood behind a welding machine. At night, I studied accounting online. I knew, no matter what had happened, life had to go on. I refused to let Daniel steal the rest of my life too. 2 years later, Frank promoted me to financial manager of the same machine shop. He smiled. I knew it from the very first day. "You never looked like a criminal to me." For the first time in years, I smiled, a real smile. Life had finally become stable. Until one afternoon in October, my phone rang. A woman's voice came through the speaker. "May I speak with Ethan Carter?" "This is Special Agent Sarah Collins, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." I froze. My heart started pounding. For 12 years, I'd lived with one fear, that one day, my past would find me again. Sarah continued, "Don't worry, you're not under investigation. Quite the opposite. We need your help." I asked, "What is this about?" There was a brief silence. Then she answered, "Daniel Carter." I tightened my grip on the phone. That name. I hadn't spoken in 12 years. "I don't know anyone by that name." Sarah's voice remained calm. "I understand how you feel. But this is a major federal investigation. We believe that 10 years ago, you were wrongfully convicted." My entire body went numb. For the first time, someone in law enforcement had finally said those words. Not, "I'm sorry, but..." "You were wrongfully convicted," Sarah continued. "We have new evidence." "Evidence strong enough to reopen the entire case?" I asked. "What kind of evidence?" "Someone from your former company stayed silent for 10 years. Last week, that person decided to cooperate." I struggled to breathe. One question kept echoing in my mind. Who? Frank? An accountant? Someone from it? Or someone in my own family? Sarah seemed to know exactly what I was thinking. She said, "I can't discuss the identity over the phone. But there's something you need to know." This person turned over a USB drive to the FBI. It contains more than 2,000 emails, server records, system access logs, and an audio recording. I closed my eyes. For 10 years, I had waited for a single piece of evidence, one opportunity, one reason, to believe the truth might someday matter. And now, it finally existed. Sarah continued, "If the data is authenticated, you will be fully exonerated. Every conviction against you will be vacated." I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel relieved. I asked only one question. "It's too late, isn't it?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. Then Sarah quietly replied, "No. Justice that arrives late is still better than justice that never arrives at all. 2 months later, the Federal Court of Appeals officially reopened my case. Digital forensic experts discovered that the surveillance footage from 10 years earlier had been manipulated. My electronic signature had been cloned using an internal security key. The wire transfer had never been executed from my workstation. It had been initiated from a backup server, managed by the Executive Operations Department. After nearly 3 months of investigation, the judge issued his ruling. The conviction of Ethan Carter is hereby vacated. The defendant is declared completely innocent. When I heard those words, I didn't cry, I didn't smile, because I knew no court order could ever return the 10 years that had been stolen from me. I walked out of the courthouse. Reporters surrounded me from every direction. They shouted questions. Are you going to sue your family? Do you want revenge against your brother? I simply shook my head. I only want to live, I thought. At last, it was finally over. But 3 weeks later, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, 2 people were standing on my front porch, an FBI special agent and a federal prosecutor. Sarah Collins looked at me, then spoke slowly. Ethan, this time, we're not here because of you. We're here because we need your help putting Daniel Carter in prison. I stood there, unable to move. Sarah placed a thick case file on my table. Across the cover were 5 simple words: United States v. Daniel Carter. And at that moment, I knew the real battle had only just begun. 3 weeks later, I walked into FBI headquarters. This time, not as a suspect, but as a witness. Special Agent Sarah Collins placed a case file, nearly 2,000 pages thick, in front of me. She looked me in the eyes. You should prepare yourself. What you're about to read will make you realize that the case from 10 years ago was far bigger than you ever imagined. I opened the first page. It was a money trail. The $3.8 million had never disappeared. The money had been divided into 12 separate transfers, moved through 7 shell companies, then deposited into an investment fund in the Cayman Islands. I looked up. Did Daniel do all of this alone? Sarah shook her head. No. At least 5 other people were involved. A lawyer, a technology specialist, a finance executive, 2 accountants, and, we believe, there was someone giving the orders. I stared at her. My father? Sarah didn't answer. Her silence was all the answer I needed. I kept reading. Every email, every invoice, every audio recording, every document revealed another piece of the truth. Then, I stopped at one particular email exchange. The date was 3 days before the money disappeared. Daniel had written, "If Ethan takes the fall, all suspicion ends with him." Below it was a reply. "Just make sure he never finds out." There was no sender's name, only an internal company email address. That had since been deleted. I looked at Sarah. "Did you identify the account owner?" She nodded. "We did. It belonged to your father." I slowly closed my eyes. For 10 years, I'd asked myself the same question. Did my father really believe I was guilty? Or was he simply too disappointed in me? Now, I finally knew the truth. He had never believed I was guilty, because he had known the truth from the very beginning. Sarah spoke again. "There's something else you need to know. Richard Carter passed away 8 months ago." I froze. Even though I'd prepared myself, hearing that my father was gone still felt like a knife through my heart. Before he died, he left behind a letter, not for his family, for his attorney. The instructions were clear. The letter was only to be opened if Daniel Carter was ever prosecuted. Sarah reached into the file, pulled out a yellow envelope, then handed it to me. "I think you should read it." My hands were shaking. Inside were only 2 sheets of paper. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. Still strong, still steady. Ethan, if you're reading this letter, then the truth has finally come to light. I kept reading. I knew you were innocent. From the very first day, the words beneath it began to blur. For the first time in years, tears rolled down my face. I forced myself to continue. I chose the company, instead of choosing you. If the truth had come out back then, more than 3,000 employees would have lost their jobs. The banks would have called every loan. The Carter family business would have collapsed. I convinced myself that sacrificing one son could save everyone else. I was wrong. The price was far too great. At the bottom of the final page, there was only one last sentence. Please, don't forgive me. I folded the letter. Inside me, there was no anger left, only an emptiness, too deep for words. 1 week later, the federal trial began. Daniel Carter was charged with multiple federal crimes: conspiracy to commit financial fraud, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, perjury, money laundering. If convicted on every count, he was facing more than 30 years in federal prison. The day I entered the courtroom, every eye turned toward me. 10 years earlier, I had stood in that room as the defendant. Today, I stood there as the government's witness. Daniel sat beside his attorneys. He had lost weight. Gray hair now touched his temples. When he saw me, he quietly lowered his head. The confidence was gone. The smile was gone. The trial lasted 4 days. On the 4th day, I was called to testify. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and said, "I swear to tell the truth." The prosecutor began. "Mr. Ethan Carter, do you recognize the defendant?" "I do." "Who is he?" "He's my older brother." The prosecutor paused, then asked quietly, "Do you hate him?" The courtroom fell completely silent. I looked at Daniel for a long time, then answered, "I did, for 10 years. But today, I'm only here to tell the truth." The prosecutor inserted the USB drive. An audio recording echoed through the courtroom. Daniel's voice, clear, undeniable. "Ethan will never figure it out once he's in prison. Everything will belong to me." Daniel lowered his head. His defense attorney immediately stood. "Objection! The recording has not been properly authenticated." At that very moment, Sarah Collins walked to the witness stand. She presented the forensic voice analysis report. The conclusion was unmistakable: a 99.9% voice match. No one said another word. Near the end of the proceedings, Daniel's attorney made one final request. If I testified that Daniel had merely been following our father's orders, his sentence could be dramatically reduced. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Ethan Carter, would you like to add anything before we conclude?" I stood, looked directly at the jury, then turned toward Daniel. My voice remained calm. 10 years ago, I lost my freedom because of a lie. Today, I will not reclaim my life with another lie. I will not blame a man who is no longer here, and I will not save a man who is still alive, if doing so requires me to betray the truth. I have told this court exactly what I know. Every piece of evidence is already before you. The rest belongs to justice. I sat down. Daniel slowly raised his head. For the first time in 10 years, he broke down in tears. Not because he knew the verdict was coming, but because, at long last, he understood. Some wounds run too deep, and some betrayals can never be undone by a single apology. 2 months later, the jury returned its verdict. Daniel Carter was found guilty on every major charge: conspiracy to commit financial fraud, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, perjury, money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in federal prison. When the sentence was read, Daniel didn't react. He simply lowered his head. Exactly the way I had 10 years earlier. But this time, the innocent man wasn't the one paying the price. After the trial, a crowd of reporters rushed toward me. One of them asked, "Do you feel justice has finally been served?" I stopped, thought for a few seconds, then answered, "Justice isn't about getting back what I lost, because no one can ever give me back 10 years of my life. Justice is making sure that no one else has to live through the same nightmare." That was my only answer. I didn't say another word. 1 week later, I visited the cemetery. For the first time since being fully exonerated. I stood before my father's grave. The headstone carried only 2 simple lines. Richard Carter, 1949, 2025. I laid down a bouquet of white flowers, then reached into my coat pocket and took out his final letter. I read it one last time, then set it on fire. The edges of the paper slowly curled into ashes. I didn't want to carry that resentment anymore. Goodbye, Dad. From today on, I'm going to live the life that belongs to me. A gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying the ashes into the sky. I turned around, walked away. My mother, Helen Carter, sent me countless letters. The first was an apology. The second begged me to meet with her. The third read, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope I can see you just one more time." I read every letter, but I never replied. Not because I still hated her, but because some wounds, even after they've healed, always leave scars. 6 months later, I received a phone call. It was Emily, the woman who had returned my engagement ring 10 years earlier. She said, "Ethan, I know I don't have the right, but I wanted to tell you I'm sorry." I smiled, a quiet, gentle smile. "Emily, you don't owe me an apology. Back then, you were just an ordinary person, trying to believe what everyone else believed. I don't blame you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she began to cry. We never found our way back to each other, because we both understood some relationships don't end because love disappears. They end because time carries 2 people in different directions. 1 year later, I founded a nonprofit organization. Its name was the Second Verdict Foundation. Our mission was to help people who had been wrongfully convicted. We helped them find lawyers, connected them with forensic experts, gave them one more chance to reclaim their lives. Inside my small office, one frame hung on the wall. Not a family photograph, not an award, but a copy of the court order. That cleared my name. The boldest words on the page were only 4. Wrongfully convicted. Conviction vacated. Every morning, I looked at those words. Not to remember how much I had suffered, but to remind myself that truth sometimes arrives far too late. Yet, as long as someone is willing to stand up and defend it, justice can never disappear completely. A few days later, I received another letter. There was no return address. Inside was only a single handwritten sentence. "You were right from the beginning." I only realized it after I'd already lost everything. There was no signature, but I knew. It was Daniel's handwriting. I folded the letter, placed it inside my desk drawer, then locked it away. The past finally deserved to remain in the past. Life taught me that the most painful part of betrayal isn't losing money. It isn't losing your reputation. It's realizing that the people you loved the most can be the very ones who turn the entire world against you. But life taught me something else as well. Don't let pain turn you into someone like them. Because the greatest victory isn't watching someone else fall. It's knowing that, after everything you've lost, you still have the strength to live with your conscience intact. Thank you for spending your time with Veritale until the very end of this story. If today's story made you reflect on trust, family, and justice, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next family betrayal stories here on Veritale. Every story leaves a lesson. Every lesson shapes a life. This is Veritale.